So please allow me to introduce our speaker, Ed Gilliland. Ed is the Senior Director at the Solar Foundation, the organization that led the first national study on solar schools in 2014. Ed was the lead author of the most recent report, Brighter Future, a study of solar on K-12 schools in the U.S. that was released this past November. And Generation 180 helped produce the report along with the Solar Energy Industries Association. Ed is the Senior Director of Programs for the Solar Foundation, and his focus includes the SolSmart municipal designation, the Solar Training Network, and the National Solar Jobs Census. Prior to joining TSF, Ed was Vice President at the International Economic Development Council. He directed all local, state, and federal consulting work, completing over 80 projects in 65 cities and regions. He holds an MBA from the University of Virginia Darden Graduate School of Business Administration. So at the end of this past week, Ed and I presented at the U.S. Green Building Council's Green Schools Conference and Expo in Denver, Colorado, to give schools guidance on how to go solar. So I'm thrilled to have gotten the feedback from an attendee of our presentation that what we shared convinced the district facilities manager to move forward with solar. And so Ed is sharing his part of the presentation on the Brighter Future report with you today. And I hope it will also be helpful for you in communicating with your school districts to convince them to go solar as well. So Ed, thank you for joining us today. And before you begin, I will share with you a bit about the efforts of our Charlottesville team to lead a local solar schools campaign. They've met with leaders from both Albemarle County and Charlottesville City School Districts to share our interest in advancing more solar in local schools and learn more about any obstacles they see in moving forward. With feedback from the Charlottesville Sustainability Office, we are planning to pursue board resolutions and advocate for a commitment to clean energy. So this summer, we'll continue to meet with more school board members to introduce our solar school campaign and our interest in a board resolution that commits to clean energy. Our brand new teams in Washington, D.C. and New York City are also making plans to meet with school district leadership and launch local solar schools campaigns where they live. So I also want to note that all attendees will stay on mute during the presentation. And if you have a question, please type your question into the box in your control panel. And you can do that anytime during the presentation. And at the end of his talk, I will call on a few of you to ask questions.
So good afternoon. Yes, this is Ed Gilliland with the Solar Foundation. And I am from the Solar Foundation. That's the logo in the bottom left. And this report was a collaboration of the Solar Foundation, Generation 180, and another organization, the Solar Energy Industries Association. So those are the three logos you have there. So we're going to start right into it. This was a report we did in the fall of 2017. Excuse me, in the fall of 2017, and it was an update and an expansion of a report we did 3 years prior. Of course, there are a lot of reasons why you would schools would want to go solar. I think you guys are familiar with most of these, so I'm not going to go over them all in detail. You will note, of course, in that list there is several that you may not have seen as frequently. So, for example, the emergency response and resilience is gaining more interest by schools and school districts and municipalities around the country because they see that schools are an opportunity to be a community anchor or community facility where the community could work to maintain power if there was an electrical outage or another type of man-made or natural disaster, and community members could go to the school and use it as they need. So there's an opportunity for schools to be an important role in emergency response and resilience, and given the recent a number of natural disasters we've had, then there's a lot of interest in this. Of course, solar is a very important component to resilience because you can generate electricity when the power is out. Community solar, I'll talk about that a little bit later on. and of course, all these other benefits and reasons for going solar. I hope you guys are excited about, as I am. There's all kind of economic, environmental, job benefits. So let's talk a little bit about economic. The price of solar is declining. And in fact, it's dropped 67% over the last 10 years, which is making it much more economical to install solar and realize a financial return. There's also a growing number of financial options to install solar, which is, again, making it better economically. And then finally, solar is a stable source of energy. So even if you were paying the same price for your solar as you would be paying for the electricity generated on the grid, the fact that solar is a stable price is a benefit to a business such as a school that wants to do budgeting and forecasting, and if they can be assured that the price of electricity is going to remain stable over the next 10 or 20 years, then they can be much more effective at forecasting and then having to pay an electricity price to the grid, which can fluctuate up and down and perhaps go way up. Of course, there are a number of environmental impacts for going solar that you guys, I'm sure, are aware of. Here's an interesting stat from our report, is that the solar on schools provides enough energy, and most of that is offsetting fossil fuel generated electricity. So the solar electricity provides enough to savings in greenhouse gas emissions to the same as you were to take 220,000 cars off the road. So there are lots of environmental impacts and benefits. Many people are concerned because the United States pulled out of the Paris Accord, and there seems to be some lack of interest at the national level in environmental benefits, but it is still very strong at the municipal level. The Sierra Club has an initiative to get cities to commit to renewable energy, and at this point, 65 mayors have committed to go 100% renewable energy by 2035. There's lots of educational opportunities for schools that go solar, and we were at the conference last week. There's a tremendous amount of interest in teachers and school officials, and because the students are interested in learning about solar, learning about the technology, learning about the economics, the policies. So this makes for a tremendous learning opportunity, and students seem very interested in learning about solar. So focusing on our report, currently there are over 5,000 schools in the United States with solar energy, and it represents just about 4.4% of U.S. schools. This shows a tremendous amount of growth. So they grew about 47% since 2014. So we added over 1,700 more schools since 2014 have adopted solar power. And that is enough to power 190,000 homes. The growth in megawatts of solar energy was even greater than that of the number of schools that grew. So because the average system size increased, as you can see in the slides there, it increased from 100 kilowatts to 300 kilowatts going from 2010 to 2017. So because the average system size has increased so much, then we had an 86% growth in solar energy produced going from 2014 to 2017. The solar is disproportionately scattered around the United States. California is by far the biggest source of solar on schools. It represents just over half of all solar in the United States that is on schools. And as an aside, I mean, California has the most residential solar, it has the most commercial solar, it has the most utility scale solar. So it is by far been and continues to be the largest state that with solar power. In fact, almost 15% of its total power is met by solar energy today. And that's a lot. And that's compared to the United States overall. The whole country, about 2% or just under 2% of our electricity is met by solar energy. Nevada is second, and you can see there's a concentration of solar power in the Southwest and in the New England, sort of New York, New Jersey area. So we have a lot of solar power in those two parts of the country, and primarily that's because policies favor solar energy production, and some of those states also experience fairly high electricity rates. So if you have high electricity rates, then solar pencils out, or the economic return on solar is even greater because you're offsetting an otherwise fairly high utility bill. You can see the growth in solar adoption at schools continues to be an upward trend. We had a lot of growth going from 2011 to 2013, and that was because of the federal budget was increased dramatically during that time because following the Great Recession of 2008, 2009. So a lot of that federal money was targeted for environmental causes, and solar on schools benefited from those funds, and we saw a lot of growth. But since 2014, we've again seen growth in solar energy, as you see. And 2017 continues to be strong. The bar graph there is just through the third quarter of 2017. So by year end, it was at or a little above 2016. I mentioned earlier that the price of solar has declined dramatically in the last 5 or 10 years, and this is just showing that the price has dropped dramatically. We categorize solar on schools as part of the non-residential market for solar energy. So that's showing the comparison between solar and the broader category of non-residential. And you can see a big drop in price in both categories. The average size, we talked about earlier, the average size of a solar system on a school has increased, and in this case, gone from 100 to 300 kilowatts, going from 2010 to 2017. Now, why is that? So early on, a lot of solar was put on schools as demonstration projects, and a good opportunity to be learning, a learning tool. And also, solar was, of course, more expensive. So schools were constrained by their budgets and reluctant to install larger systems. But today, the decision to install solar is primarily based on the amount of electricity that the school uses and on the characteristics of the school site. So there is a lot more incentive because costs are down. There's a lot more incentive to really build more solar so that it meets more of the electricity demand, and given as long as the school facility, the buildings, and the grounds can can house the solar, can host the solar. Again, we're talking about average system size is going up, and again, influenced by declining prices. The financing for solar is primarily done in two ways. One is through bond issues that school districts issue to raise money, and they often will raise money to do other things besides solar. You can issue a big, large bond issue and raise funds to rehab schools, to rehab multiple schools, to do energy efficiency improvements to the schools, such as the improvements to the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, and include solar as part of that package. So that's done very frequently. Another way that solar is done through power purchase agreements, and that's where private investors come in and actually take ownership of the solar, and they get tax breaks for doing so, and then they sell the power back to the school, and they sell it at typically they would sell it at a rate that's below that of the market rates that the schools are paying the utility for electricity. So the school saves money from day one, and all of the investment is done by the private sector. The private sector also operates the systems, they maintain it and own it, and so the school has a much less involved and much less work to do, and the school does not have to raise money because the private sector is doing so. So these are becoming much more popular, and you can see that these we call power purchase agreements, or PPAs, are now the majority of or certainly the majority of the projects for the larger systems. We want to look here also at what's happening. If you look at schools across the U.S., we have the metro areas, the micro areas, which are going to be more suburban areas, and rural. And so you can see here that there's a lot of schools in the metro areas. Again, 4.8% of schools have solar, whereas in rural areas, only 1.7% have solar. So it's not caught on quite as much in the rural areas as we have in the metro areas. And why is that? We sort of discussed that at the conference, and there's some thinking that perhaps the rural areas have more constrained budgets. They also often have declining student populations, and sometimes they may not benefit as much from seeing solar at the school next to them or in the district next to them. So a lot of what drives solar on schools and even houses is seeing that your neighbors or a nearby district has put up solar, and then you can easily compare notes and see what a benefit it is, and so a district will often get convinced or interested in solar because of what nearby districts have done. Solar on public versus private schools, we're seeing a little more solar on the public schools, and perhaps again, public schools have a strong credit rating, a big district. Private schools are smaller. Maybe they don't have the same footprint on the ground or on their rooftop to install solar. But still, private schools should benefit from solar as well, because they're often easier. There's less red tape to do solar development on private schools because your decision-making process can be easier. So there's certainly reasons why private schools should adopt solar. So talk about some case studies. So this is the Washoe County School District. It's in the Reno, Nevada area. And interestingly enough, they started solar in 2017 from a donation from a Burning Man festival-supported nonprofit. I don't know if you guys know what Burning Man is, but it's a big festival out in Nevada. It takes place every year where thousands of people go and hang out and listen to music and build fires and have a good time. So this is a donation that they provided, and since then the school district has continued to add solar power. They now have 35 of their 93 schools have solar, which powers 12% of their total electricity needs. And it's been funded primarily through public funds, through bonds. And the AARA is the budget money that was the act that was initiated by the Obama administration in response to the Great Recession, where there was a lot of public money for environmental and other needs. The district's goal is to hit 20% renewable by 2020, and so they're continuing to develop solar. All of this solar in this district has been done on rooftop. Maybe a few what we call carports or shade structures, but primarily rooftop, and all of it's been done on site. So they have had an interest in doing off-site, but that's not worked out yet. They've also saved a lot of energy on geothermal. So the ground source heat pumps have helped them save energy. And again, as I mentioned earlier, this is an example where they would go and issue bonds and raise money and spend the money not only on solar, but on other energy efficiency improvements. Grays Lake High School is just outside of Chicago in Illinois, and they have developed, or they are actually building right now, solar on 2 of their high schools on the roofs, and then they also have a third ground-mounted system on some vacant land that they have. And the ground-mounted system tends to be is fairly large, so it's generating almost 3 megawatts of power, which can offset 36% of the district's energy needs. So they're expecting a big savings, $10 million over the life of the systems, and like all of these schools in all these cases, they are developing educational curriculum to support the solar and integrate solar into the teaching and into the classrooms. I mentioned earlier that I would talk a little bit more about community solar. So community solar is not so far has not been used very widely on schools. It's really just now emerging as a new market or a new type of solar that's in the U.S. And in community solar, an investor typically does ground-mounted or large-scale rooftop solar off-site, and they get subscribers, such as residents or businesses that subscribe to the system, and the solar power that it generates is used as a credit, or it offsets the electric bill of the homeowners and businesses that they're using electricity. So it's really good for residences and businesses that cannot put solar on their roof. Maybe for one reason or another, there's the shade, the trees, there's too much shade, the roof isn't adequate to hold solar. So for whatever reason, the residences and businesses can subscribe to this large solar project that might be taking place 5, 10, 15 miles away. And school, given that schools often have a lot of land, a lot of roof space, could be ideal for setting up these community solar projects, and they would typically they could get it financed by private sector investors, and and make it very economical. And so we're looking, more and more schools are interested in community solar. The Washoe School District I just mentioned is very interested in community solar. It does require the state to adopt laws that support community solar. And so only a few states have got very favorable laws for community solar. Colorado and Minnesota are a couple of the best. And Nevada, that's one of the reasons they have not done community solar, is that Nevada has yet to pass a favorable law. Okay, so sometimes students are able to, as you guys are working, students can take the initiative and help put solar on schools. I have a case here. This is while this is back in 2008, it's an interesting case, and everybody, given it's 10 years old, everybody was willing to speak very freely, and so we like this case. It's got some interesting little twists. But this is a gentleman, Jason, in San Mateo, California, and he wanted to get solar on his school, but he realized that there was not a lot of interest by the powers to be in installing solar, at least not initially. So he created an environmental committee. He had an environmental club, and he sort of changed it into an environmental committee, and he invited the principal and some of the teachers to be on the committee. And then he very cleverly created a letterhead, put everybody's names on the letterhead, the students and the teachers and the principal, so it had sort of that official look to it. And so when he started reaching out to other groups in the school board or companies, he would use the letterhead and got some pretty good response. At one point, he got one of the large companies to come in, solar companies to come in, present to everybody, and presented about solar and what a great investment it was, but it didn't work. The presentation wasn't embraced by the powers to be, so he kept going back to the drawing board. Another point, a congresswoman sent out a request for new ideas with the idea that they would be able to get some government money to fund the winners. And so he convinced them to submit the solar as an idea. It was one of the 5 finalists, but still not selected. So Jason continues to plow ahead, and at some point the board did decide they had to do a bond issue. And now solar was on the radar because they'd been talking about it for a number of months. And so it got more in the discussion, and finally, and at this point, they funded solar on 6 of the schools, including Jason's school, Aragon High School. So by the time the solar was complete, Jason was off to college, but he did come back for the groundbreaking and participate in a lot of the activities. So it just shows that sometimes it takes a little bit of persistence, but he was able to persevere and make it work. This is another situation. This is more recent. In fact, this is under construction right now. So in Bozeman, Montana, this is a 7th grader, and she worked with the school and the school board to get school on her middle school, Sacagawea Middle School. And so she went, of course, first to the principal, and he was sort of lukewarm to the idea, but she was able to present before the school board and made a good impression. And so the school committed to provide $25,000 for solar. The school was being renovated, and they thought it was a good idea, but they really needed more than that. They needed $115,000. And so she worked in the community to work with foundations to secure additional funding. One of the things she did was do some school events. It raised $11,000 through school events, and this made a more persuasive case to the foundations because here the school districts chipped in some money. She's raised some money through school events, and now the foundation feels really excited about contributing some more funds. And so eventually she got $80,000 from a foundation, and it was enough to install the solar. In fact, I think they had a little bit of money left over. So just to summarize, we have districts. We see a lot of districts out there. They're putting solar on multiple schools. There's even setting renewable goals, like you saw in Nevada, especially in these active solar markets like Nevada, California, New York, Massachusetts, and the students and the parents often initiate this for environmental reasons. But ultimately, the districts they'll buy in, but they're primarily driven by economic reasons. We're seeing a shift in private funding, and there's still a lot of challenges out there. There's not only to get funding, but to get subject matter expertise. The schools are still learning about this, and so when you first bring it up to them, there's a little bit of head scratching that goes on because there is a lot to learn. Okay, I think I'm. That's the end of my talk, and I'll turn it back to you, Tish.
So actually, Ed, I'd love for you to cover this part as well. So
okay.
Just for our volunteer teams listening, as Ed is talking about, what schools still need to go solar, this is a new project that the Solar Foundation is working on in partnership with Quieto USA, and Generation 180 is supporting it and trying to help spread the word. But I would love for you to talk a little more about it, and that's something they might be able to offer to school districts as they're out in their communities trying to get school districts excited about solar.
Sure. Okay. All right. Thanks, Tish. Sure. So what are the resources out there? I want to talk about one of the things that we're working on is to do high-level assessments for school districts. So often for school district to decide to go solar is often it's a significant financial leap. And even if they want to do a full-scale feasibility study, that can cost quite a bit of funds to hire consultants, and so they're often reluctant to take that step. And you do need to do research and understand the schools, understand the existing power usage, and what the potential is to put solar on the roof and on the property. So what we're doing is we're going to be working with schools to provide very high-level feasibility assessment. So we have solar master plan for schools. So in effect, we're going to be looking at the electricity use, the electricity cost. We'll be looking at the building facilities and come back to give the school district some broad numbers on what the likely economic return would be. So here here's a school district that, and we're working with Quieto USA. This is a project they did in California. So you can see they looked at all the schools in the district and looked at the roofs, and the parking, the profile, and system cost, and avoided electricity, and we're able to come back and say, okay, if the school enacted solar, then the value of putting solar on these schools would be about $7 million. This is the idea, is to get a broad perspective at a high level to give the school some indication of what the economic return could be. Following that, the school would still have to go ahead and invest more funds to do a full-blown feasibility study to prepare requests to send out to installers for bids. So this is a first step. We typically, this is sort of a low-cost first step to get the schools interested, whet their appetites, and say, okay, it seems to make economic sense. We'll look at some of the policies, the state policies line up with what the school wants to do. It seems to make economic sense. Okay, now they're willing to commit more resources and move forward. Okay, and I think that's my ending slide here.
All right, thank you, Ed, so much for sharing your expertise in solar schools with us today. And that was a perfect summary of our Brighter Future report. And it was a great training for our volunteers who are starting solar schools campaigns in Charlottesville, Washington, D.C., and New York City. So I know our volunteers must be eager to ask you questions. So I'm going to take questions from both those of you listening at home. You can type your question into the control panel, and I'll be able to see it there. And also take questions from our Charlottesville team. So I see a couple that have already been entered online. So let's see. Josh Spodak, I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you and you can ask your question to Ed. Okay, Josh,
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so, well, this is more of a suggestion. When I think of schools, I think their primary interest, even more than financial returns, is education. And one of the big things is getting kids into college and engagement and participation in the classroom. And I suspect that the students that you mentioned who did those projects, if they got into better colleges than they would have had they not done those projects, I think that would carry a lot of weight. And not just to say a couple students did, but if that possibility is across the board for a lot of different schools, I think that's the language that would influence people more. This will get kids into college. This will get them more engaged in school. This will help them if they want to just work after high school, then it'll get them jobs faster. So a suggestion there.
Great suggestion. Yes, absolutely. By the way, Jason at the Aragon, he went on to Stanford and is now an entrepreneur in New York City.
I have to say that to me, that carries more weight than all the stuff you said. He got into Stanford?
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's like a really big deal. I would have maybe started the whole presentation with that.
Well, certainly
well,
good
that's
point.
a great.
I mean, obviously,
Josh,
it depends on the audience.
Thank you, and thanks for your suggestion, Josh. And I'll just chime in there. You know, one grant that we're working on in the city of Richmond in Virginia, we put out a call for grant money for schools in the area to go solar, and consistently when superintendents were on the line talking about why they were interested, a lot of them definitely came forward and say, we're primarily interested for the educational opportunity and hopefully we can save some money as well. So that was nice affirmation to hear that from superintendents, that they also saw this as a great way to enhance science learning. Great. I have a question from Natasha, and I'll just read it since it's a short one, and Natasha, I'll unmute you in case you want to comment also. It says, can you please explain more about what bonds are and how it's used in helping schools go solar?
Sure. So typically for the schools to do a large capital improvement project, such as renovate a school or completely upgrade its electrical and heating and air conditioning systems, they go to Wall Street or they go to the public markets and they will it's like a loan. So essentially they're saying to investors, you give us $100 million and we will pay you back interest over the next 20 years. So we'll pay you back at 3% interest each year. So the investors are willing, if they like that interest rate and they feel that the school has the financial wherewithal to pay back, then the investors will invest the $100 million. And now the school has that money, the school district has that money, and each year they have to pay back the interest. And at the end of 20 years, they pay the investors back for the entire $100 million. So that way they're able to use the money for large capital improvement projects. And in the meantime, they're also saving money, setting aside a little bit of money each year so that they will be able to pay back the bond at the end of, say, 20 years.
Great, thank you, Ed. And I have one more question from our listening audience. And Laura, I'm going to unmute you now.
Hi, I just wanted to ask about the PPAs, whether or not they were the best way for schools to take advantage of solar, because I know that's what school system locally has done here. What about the long-term benefits of owning their systems?
So of course, the advantage of the power purchase agreement is that the third-party investor or the installer comes in and they finance it, they get all the money and pay for the system, and they construct it, and they maintain it. And so the school and the school district doesn't have to do very much except initially to work out the contract and work out the deal with the PPA or with the investor installer company. It's a great deal for the schools. However, some schools, and as a lot of us like to own things, and so schools may be reluctant to do the PPA because they would rather own their solar on the roof, just like they own their own heating and air conditioning systems, and so it may seem odd to them to not own something that's right on the roof of the school or right on their property. So the PPA has lots of advantages. It's an easy for the schools to do, or much easier project for the schools to do because a third party is doing so much of the work. As a disadvantage, the school district may not get quite as good a deal financially from the PPA. So the PPA may allow them to save a half a cent per kilowatt hour. It may allow them to save a little bit on their electricity, but if they did it all themselves, they might be able to save more on their electricity. Mm-hmm. It just means they have to do more work because they have to raise their own money. So it's really, does the school want to invest a lot of time and effort and do their own system, or would they rather say take it easy and allow a third party to do all the work and maintain the system?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Ed, I think that's all the time we have for questions. So thank you so much for everyone for your thoughtful questions, and thank you, Ed, again for sharing your time and knowledge with us today. We appreciate you joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend.